Welcome, health enthusiasts. You're tuned into the Wellness and Us channel for today's podcast. We're thrilled to discuss why dieting can be so challenging, clarify how the keto diet works, delve into the science behind it, and identify when it's best to avoid the keto diet, along with its potential side effects. We're confident you'll find this episode both informative and fun. Please keep in mind that the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not replace medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider before making any significant changes to your diet. Let's kick this off.
You know that feeling, right? That whole diet roller coaster thing.
Oh,
You jump on something new, you're excited, maybe you see the scale move down a bit, feels great.
Mm-hmm.
But then somehow it just creeps back on. And you end up maybe where you started, sometimes even like heavier. It's just frustrating. Same story, different diet.
And that cycle, that up and down, is exactly what the sources you gave us really focus on. They make the point that, look, most diets can work, for losing weight initially, if you actually stick to them.
Right.
The real challenge, the big one, isn't just losing it, it's sustainability, keeping it off long term.
Absolutely. And one diet that keeps popping up, gets a lot of buzz, promises these, exciting, sometimes really rapid results, is the keto diet.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely popular.
So you brought us all this material, articles, notes, and research, even transcripts, and we want to dig into what these sources actually say about it.
Yeah, and that's the plan for this deep dive. We're going to unpack everything you've got here. Really try to understand, based on these sources, how keto works, why it gets so much attention, what potential benefits it might offer, beyond just the weight loss numbers.
Right.
And really importantly, the challenges and the specific ways these materials suggest you might make it sustainable, a real lifestyle change, not just a quick fix.
Okay, let's try and cut through some of the noise then, just using the info you've gathered for us here.
Yeah.
So where do we start? The basic idea. What is keto, according to these sources?
Well, at its heart, keto is about changing your body's primary fuel source. So normally we run on glucose, sugar, from carbs.
Right. Bread, pasta, sugar, fruit.
Exactly. The whole point of keto is to push your body into a state called ketosis. And in ketosis, your body switches from burning that sugar to burning fat for energy instead.
And the sources are really clear that a specific hormone, insulin, is like the main player in this switch.
Oh, absolutely key. Think of insulin as maybe a traffic cop for sugar. When you eat carbs, your blood sugar goes up, insulin gets released.
Okay.
Its job is basically to get that sugar out of your blood and into your cells for energy or, store it.
Right.
But here's the really critical part the sources emphasize. When insulin levels are high, it basically tells your body, stop burning stored fat. Don't release it.
Wow.
The sources call it an either-or proposition. You're mostly burning sugar, or you're mostly burning fat. If insulin's high, because you ate carbs, you're in sugar burning mode.
And the fat just stays put, that spare tire they mentioned.
Exactly. It stays right there. So by keeping carbs really, really low, insulin stays low. And that allows your body to finally tap into and burn your stored fat.
So the whole strategy is cut carbs way down, keep insulin low, flip the switch to fat burning. What does that actually mean for what you eat, the macros?
Yeah, the macronutrient breakdown is pretty different from standard advice. Based on your materials, a typical keto diet is very high in fat. We're talking roughly 70 to 80% of your daily calories.
Wow, okay. 70 to 80% fat.
Yeah. Then protein is moderate, maybe 15 to 20%. And carbs are just tiny, like 5 to 10% of calories.
Which translates to grams how?
The sources usually say aim for under 50 grams of total carbs a day. And ideally even lower, somewhere in the 12 to 25 gram range.
That is a huge difference from, the standard food pyramid or whatever guidelines most people know.
Yeah.
45, 65% carbs usually.
It's a massive shift, a total restructure of your plate, really.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the sources note this isn't like a brand new fad. The ketogenic diet actually goes way back to the 1920s.
Right, I saw that. It was originally developed as a medical treatment, wasn't it? For epilepsy in children.
Exactly. And it's still used for that today. It's got a proven, documented effect in that specific area.
Okay, so we get the mechanism. Low carbs, low insulin, fat burning. Ketosis. Now, the big reason people are interested, weight loss. What do the sources say about how keto actually helps you lose weight?
Well, first off, they acknowledge the absolute basic principle still applies. Calories in versus calories out. You still need an energy deficit to lose weight.
Eat less, burn more, or
Yeah.
both. Yeah.
That hasn't changed, but keto seems to help achieve that deficit through a few specific ways, according to these materials. We already talked about controlling insulin, right? That lets your body burn stored fat.
Okay, so accessing the fat stores is one thing.
Yep. And then just practically speaking, when you cut out almost all carbs, bread, pasta, rice, sugary drinks, snacks, you're naturally cutting out a huge chunk of calories you might have eaten before.
Right. Even if you're not counting obsessively, you're probably eating less overall.
That's a big factor the sources mentioned. Plus, there's that initial, often quite dramatic, weight drop.
Yeah, people talk about losing a lot in the first week.
And the sources explain a fair bit of that is actually water loss. See, carbs are stored in your body as glycogen, mostly in muscles and liver. And each gram of glycogen holds onto several grams of water. So when you slash the carbs, you deplete those glycogen stores.
And you shed the water attached to it.
Exactly. So that big initial whoosh isn't all fat disappearing overnight. Some is water.
Good to know. What else?
Appetite control. This seems pretty key. The sources consistently note that fat and protein are much more satiating than carbs. They keep you feeling fuller for longer.
So you're just less hungry. Less likely to snack.
Potentially, yes. One source specifically mentions keto might help suppress ghrelin. That's often called the hunger hormone.
Interesting. So it helps manage hunger, which makes eating fewer calories easier.
Yeah.
Did the sources mention studies comparing keto to other diets, like low-fat?
They did. They referenced some studies, including meta-analyses, suggesting that low-carb approaches often lead to more weight loss than traditional low-fat diets, especially in the first, say, 6 months to a year.
More weight loss how? Like, significantly more.
Well, one meta-analysis mentioned found maybe about 2 pounds more weight loss on average with keto compared to low-fat in some studies. Another small study, this one on older adults, reported nearly 5 times more weight loss on keto, so some evidence for an edge, especially early on.
But I also saw a note about plateaus, and maybe things evening out later.
Yes, that's important too. They mentioned one study where participants lost a good chunk initially, like 15 pounds in the first month, another 11 over the next 2. But then, even sticking to the diet, they hit a plateau. Weight loss stalled.
So powerful start maybe, but long-term is still complex.
Exactly. Which ties back to that whole sustainability question again.
Okay, now beyond just weight, the sources did touch on other potential benefits, though it seemed like there were quite a few buts and maybes attached.
Yes, definitely. This section was more about areas of ongoing research and potential rather than proven facts for everyone. We already mentioned its established use for epilepsy in kids, like 30–40% fewer seizures reported.
Right. And then there was stuff about neurological conditions,
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
Exactly. The sources point to some, well, promising early findings. For Alzheimer's, things like improved cognitive function, the brain using ketones for fuel, maybe better mitochondrial function. For Parkinson's, a possibility it might help break down a certain protein.
Right.
And they cited one small study from 2016 on MS patients, which suggested improvements in quality of life, mental and physical health.
And this seemed like a big, and in the sources, this is all still very early days, right?
Yeah.
Especially in humans.
Crucially important point, yes. The sources are very clear. For these conditions, much more research is needed, larger human trials. It's promising, it's interesting, but it's definitely not a proven treatment or outcome yet.
Got it. Potential, not proof. What about type 2 diabetes? That seems like a more direct link, given the focus on sugar and insulin.
It does. The sources highlight keto's ability to lower blood sugar levels, A1C levels, quite significantly, and improve insulin sensitivity, maybe by up to 75% in some cases.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, and a 2017 review mentioned in the materials noted keto was linked to better glucose control and people needing less medication. But it also raised a good question. Was this improvement solely due to the keto diet itself? Or was it mainly just the result of the weight loss that happened on the diet?
So it's hard to separate the diet's specific effect from the effect of just losing weight, which helps diabetes anyway.
Exactly. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, they pointed out.
And heart health. The sources seemed a bit mixed on that.
They really did. It was kind of conflicting. One source suggested keto might help lower triglycerides and affect HDL and LDL cholesterol, but then another meta-analysis found low-carb and keto diets actually led to significantly greater increases in both HDL, the good cholesterol, and LDL, the bad, compared to balanced diets.
Increases in both. That seems counterintuitive.
It does. And on blood pressure, that same analysis found no significant difference between the groups. So, yeah. Mixed signals.
So definitely not a clear picture on heart health from these sources.
Not at all. The sources themselves basically said more research is needed, and heart disease is super complex anyway. Lots of factors involved.
Okay. And cancer. Was there anything solid there?
Only mentions of animal studies, things showing reduced tumor growth in certain cancers, colon, stomach, brain in mice or rats.
What, just animals?
Right. The sources stressed very clearly. Human research is essential. You can't just assume animal results apply to people.
So, bottom line on these other benefits.
Yeah.
Epilepsy is established. The rest are areas of research, some promising, some unclear, but none are really guaranteed outcomes, especially if you're generally healthy starting out. Is that a fair summary of the sources?
I think that captures the careful framing in the materials perfectly. Potential, not proven widespread benefit yet.
Which brings us right back to that massive challenge we started with. Sustainability. Why people can't stick with diets. This seems like a really central theme in the sources.
It absolutely was. Kind of the core message running through several of them. The argument is, diets don't fail because they don't work initially. They fail because people just can't or don't sustain them. They fall back into old habits, the weight comes back, often plus some extra. They treat the diet like a temporary fix, a Band-Aid solution, as one source put it, not a real permanent shift in how they live and eat.
So if sticking with it is the real key, then your mindset, how you approach it mentally, must be absolutely critical. The sources called it essential, non-negotiable.
They really emphasize this. They outlined 3 sort of core mindset shifts needed for success. First, genuinely believe you can do it.
Not just looking at other people's before and after photos.
Exactly. It's about your internal belief. The sources suggest this belief directly impacts your actions and outcomes. If you don't truly believe you can succeed, you're kind of setting yourself up to fail. Self-sabotage.
Makes sense. If you think it's impossible, why bother trying hard? What's the second mindset?
Begin with what you have, right now. Don't wait for the perfect time or think you need to magically become a different person first.
Yeah, the All-Start Monday trap.
Totally. Work with your current life, your tastes, your habits, your schedule. The sources say conditions are never perfect. You just have to start from where you are.
Good reminder. No more waiting for the stars to align. And the third one.
Focus on enjoying the food. This was interesting. Shift your perspective from seeing diet food as denial or punishment.
Yeah, like rabbit food.
Right. Instead, view eating as a celebration of taste. And they point out keto actually includes a lot of rich, fatty foods, bacon, cheese, cream stuff many people already genuinely enjoy.
So it's not all deprivation.
That's the idea. By focusing on the pleasure of eating delicious keto-friendly foods, it makes the whole thing feel less like a chore and more sustainable, maybe even enjoyable. It changes your relationship with food.
That's a powerful reframe. Embracing enjoyable foods within the rules instead of just focusing on what's cut out. Which leads nicely into the actual strategies the sources suggest for making keto sustainable. They have this phrase, displace, do not replace. What's that about?
This seemed like a really core practical strategy from your materials. The idea is, instead of going cold turkey, just suddenly eliminating all your old favorite foods.
Which sounds hard and kind of miserable.
Exactly. The source argued that sudden, drastic removal triggers psychological resistance, like a fear of loss. So the recommended approach is much more gradual.
So not a scorched earth policy on your pantry then?
No. The strategy is to start by adding keto-friendly foods and meals into your routine first. Focus on finding and eating keto things you like.
Okay, at first.
Yeah. And as you do that, as you get used to these new foods and find you enjoy them, your tastes and cravings naturally start to shift over time. The old non-keto stuff just gets crowded out, displaced.
So they just kind of fade away naturally rather than being forcibly removed?
That's the concept. It avoids that sharp shock of deprivation and makes the transition smoother, more organic.
That sounds much more psychologically manageable. What are some of the first steps or food choices they suggest for this adding in phase?
Well, it starts with identifying fatty foods you already like that fit keto. Bacon, eggs, avocado, cheese, nuts, olive oil, butter. Lean into those existing preferences.
Makes sense. Start with what you enjoy.
Then focus on making meals and snacks that really fill you up. Satiety is key, remember? Fat and protein do that well. They mention things like macadamia nuts or cream cheese as good, satisfying snack options.
Okay, so use satisfying keto foods to prevent hunger and cravings.
Exactly. Then they suggest gradually tackling specific habits, like soda. including diet soda.
Right, you mentioned one source linked Diet Cola to shorter life expectancy. That's pretty strong.
It was quite direct, yeah. The advice was to eventually cut out all sodas, but start the process now, gradually reducing.
Okay. What else gets gradually displaced?
Grain-based snacks were next. Crackers, chips, cookies, that kind of thing. Slowly reduce those, maybe explore substitutes like almond flour crackers sometimes.
Hmm.
And then also slowly work on reducing milk-based snacks or drinks, though they acknowledge this one can be trickier for some people.
So it's a patient-phased approach. Add the good stuff, let it naturally push out the other stuff over time. And eventually, though, you do have to get those carbs way down for ketosis, right?
Yes, that's what they call the wind-down carbs phase.
Oh,
Once you've built some momentum with eating more keto foods, the next conscious step is to really start tracking and reducing your total carb intake down into that target range under 50 gram, ideally 12-25 green per day. That's what ensures you get into and stay in ketosis.
And the sources highlighted a few specific keto wonder foods that are particularly helpful here.
They did. Eggs got a big shout out, called them your best friend on keto.
Really? Why eggs?
Well, they pointed out how eggs used to get a bad rap, cholesterol fears. But now, based on this research, they're seen as nutritional powerhouses, packed with protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, very filling for relatively few calories, super versatile, cheap, easy.
Okay, eggs are in. What else?
Avocado, obviously, praised for its high healthy fat content. And interestingly, cauliflower.
Cauliflower. That seems counterintuitive, isn't it? A vegetable with carbs?
It does have carbs, yeah, but the sources included it as a kind of useful exception.
Yeah.
Because it works so well as a stand-in for starchy things, cauliflower rice, cauliflower mash.
Ah, the great pretender.
Exactly. It helps scratch that itch for starch without derailing you completely. But there was a really important warning attached to that. Be careful not to overdo protein in general, whether from cauliflower or meat or anything else, because your liver can actually turn excess protein into glucose into sugar.
Seriously?
Yeah. It's a process called gluconeogenesis. And if your liver starts making sugar from protein, well, that can kick you right out of ketosis, even if you're not eating carbs.
Wow. Okay. So even protein needs to be managed, not just carbs. Use cauliflower wisely, but watch the overall protein.
Precisely. Keep protein moderate.
Got it. Now, beyond the food itself, the sources talked about stepping up results with new habits, behavioral changes.
Yeah, these are crucial for making it stick, like eating only when you're genuinely hungry. Breaking that habit of just eating by the clock or out of boredom.
Easier said than done sometimes.
For sure. And a related tip. If you feel a hunger pang, try drinking water first. Often, it's actually thirst masquerading as hunger. They suggested trying warm water initially.
Interesting. Drink first, then assess hunger. What else?
Eating slowly, really taking your time, it gives your brain the chance to register satiety signals so you realize you're full before you've overeaten.
The 20-minute rule kind of thing.
Yeah. Plus, you enjoy the food more. And that ties into the idea of looking at meals as an event, eating mindfully, being present, savoring the food, celebrating it, rather than just shoveling it down while distracted.
Helps with portion control and that positive relationship with food idea.
Exactly. It all works together.
And then the sources mentioned even more advanced habits for people who want to go deeper.
Yeah, presented as optional next steps, things you might progress to. First, regularizing your meal times. Paying attention to your body's natural hunger cycles, figuring out when you truly get hungry, and trying to stick to those windows. Resolving not to eat outside them if you're not actually hungry requires a lot of self-awareness.
And if you can manage that.
Then the next logical step could be eliminating or drastically reducing snacking, which becomes easier if you're eating satisfying meals at regular intervals. Start by just cutting back gradually.
Okay.
And then potentially, eventually scaling down to maybe just 1 or 2 meals a day.
Wow. Like intermittent fasting built in.
Kinda, yeah. It's presented as a natural progression for some if the earlier steps are mastered. Obviously, eating only once or twice significantly cuts calories. Combine that with some modest activity, walking, biking, and the sources suggest it can really enhance results.
That feels like a big leap, the 1 or 2 meals a day.
It is, and definitely not where you'd start. It's an endpoint some might reach. The sources even briefly mentioned more structured day-to-day fasting, like eating normally one day, fasting the next, or variations as a kind of ultimate advanced technique. But they noted many people succeed long-term without ever going that far.
Okay, so advanced options, but not essential for everyone.
Right.
We've covered a lot how it works, benefits, sustainability strategies, but the sources were also very clear. Keto, is not for everyone.
Absolutely critical point. Your materials explicitly listed groups who should probably avoid keto. Athletes, especially endurance athletes or bodybuilders, were high on the list.
Why them specifically?
They need readily available carbs for quick energy, for explosive power, for replenishing muscle glycogen after intense workouts, and for muscle building itself. The sources suggest keto might actually impair performance for those kinds of activities.
Okay, so performance athletes maybe steer clear. Who else?
People with pre-existing kidney problems,
Mm,
or gallbladder issues, pancreas problems, certain gastrointestinal disorders. The high fat load can be really hard on those systems.
right, makes sense.
Also, anyone with a history of eating disorders, the restrictive nature could be problematic. And then, maybe just practically, people who truly adore carbs and know deep down they could never stick to such a low intake. Adherence is key, remember.
True. What about side effects that keto flu people talk about?
Ah, yes, the initiation phase. The sources describe those temporary symptoms: nausea, headache, feeling dizzy or tired, muscle cramps, brain fog, even bad breath or changes in sweaterine odor.
Sounds pretty unpleasant. What causes it?
Mostly electrolyte imbalances in your body just adapting to burning fat instead of sugar. It's a major metabolic shift. And losing that water weight initially also throws off electrolytes.
But it's temporary, usually.
Generally, yes. A few days to a week or so for most people. They also mentioned potential constipation as an issue.
Oh, right, because you cut out a lot of fiber from grains and fruits.
Exactly. So the advice was to really focus on getting enough fiber from low-carb vegetables, leafy greens, broccoli, stuff like that. And maybe consider a fiber supplement if needed.
Okay. And any longer-term health warnings beyond the initial adjustment?
The sources did mention some potential long-term concerns, specifically linked to very strict multi-year adherence, like the kind used medically for epilepsy.
Okay, so maybe not the typical dieter's experience, but still noted.
Right. In those long-term medically supervised cases, there have been associations with things like kidney stones, potentially high cholesterol levels needing management, and even bone fractures. Liver issues were also flagged as a possibility to monitor over the long haul.
So, important context. Even if a typical keto diet isn't quite that extreme, these are documented potential risks with very long-term strict use.
Precisely, which just reinforces the advice repeated in the sources.
Yeah.
Talk to your doctor before starting keto, especially if you have any health conditions or you're on medications. It's essential.
Definitely. Okay, so pulling all this together, how keto works, the pros, the cons, the sustainability issues.
Yeah.
What was the sort of final verdict from these sources when comparing keto to other ways of eating?
Well, the general consensus across the materials you provided seems to be this. Keto can work. It can be effective for weight loss, especially initially. And it's not inherently harmful for most healthy adults once they adapt. Won't kill you, as one source put it. However,
There's always a however.
right. Based on the research cited here, the broader scientific community hasn't found consistent proof that keto offers a significant long-term advantage over other diets when calories and protein are matched. Meaning if you compare keto to, say, a balanced lower-calorie diet or even a low-fat diet and people in both groups eat the same number of calories and the same amount of protein, the long-term results for fat loss, metabolic health, performance, they might end up being pretty similar.
So keto doesn't necessarily have some unique metabolic magic long-term, if other factors are equal.
That's the conclusion drawn from the evidence presented in these sources, which leads back to their ultimate point. The best diet isn't necessarily about the specific macros. It's often just the one that you can realistically and consistently stick with over time. Adherence is king.
Which brings us right back where we started. Sustainability. Mindset. That's the real game changer for any approach, keto included.
It really seems to be the core message. The strategies your sources offered for keto, the mindset shifts, the gradual displace, don't replace idea, they're all aimed at building that sustainable lifestyle. It takes effort, absolutely, consistency. But the underlying message was that it is presented as achievable if approached that way.
Okay, so let's quickly recap what we've unpacked from your sources. Keto flips your body's fuel switch to fat by drastically cutting carbs and keeping insulin low. This can drive significant weight loss, particularly at the start, and there's potential for other health benefits, but much more solid human research is needed for most of those. The biggest hurdle, though, isn't making it work initially, it's sticking with it. And these sources suggest success hinges on adopting it as a lifestyle, focusing on mindset, and making gradual, sustainable habit changes over time.
Exactly. It's a commitment, no doubt. But the sources frame it as doable. That line stuck with me. If other people can do it, you can do it too. It's presented as an achievable path, despite the challenges.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final thought to chew on, based on everything we've discussed from these sources. If long-term success with any way of eating really comes down to sustainability, how does this specific keto strategy, we talk about the idea of actually embracing fatty foods you might already like and gently displacing old habits instead of declaring war on them. How does that challenge your own ideas about what dieting has to look like? And does that particular approach, focusing on gradual change and incorporating enjoyment, make the keto path seem potentially more appealing or maybe more achievable for you?
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Wellness and Us podcast. We truly appreciate your presence and hope you found the discussion about diets, the keto lifestyle, and intermittent fasting to be valuable. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. We also encourage you to share this podcast with your friends, family, and anyone you think might benefit from our conversation. Let's spread the knowledge and help those we care about. We're thrilled to have you as part of our community, and we can't wait to see you again next week for a brand new podcast episode. Remember to tune in next Wednesday for more exciting discussions and wellness tips. Until then, take care, stay healthy, and have a wonderful week ahead.